Welcome to WAYPOINTS, the podcast of fly fishing travel. With helpful travel tips, news and events, destination profiles, great stories, and expert advice from seasoned and experienced traveling anglers, this is your backstage pass to the world of fishing travel. WAYPOINTS is fueled by adventure and brought to you by Yellow Dog Fly Fishing, a hands-on specialty travel and booking company that delivers the industry's very best insider knowledge, logistical support, and trip preparation. Freshwater or saltwater, international or domestic, Yellow Dog has you covered. And now your host, Yellow Dog founder and director, Jim Klug.
Andy Mill is a name that is well known in numerous outdoor circles, from the slopes of the world's great downhill courses to the Tarpon Flats of the Florida Keys. Since first hitting the scene as a young and fearless ski racer on the U.S. national team in the 1970s, Andy's life journey reads like a how-to book for racking up incredible experiences and escapades. A life well lived, full of nonstop adventures and endless stories. Over the years, his occupations have included Olympic athlete, broadcaster, author, television host, world traveler, and, of course, professional angler and tournament legend. As a fly fisherman, Andy has crafted an amazing resume of accomplishments, all the while developing a reputation for being friendly, approachable, and always willing to share information and help those who are new to the sport. There is no doubt that Andy Mill has established himself as one of the most recognizable and gracious worldwide ambassadors for the sport of fly fishing. I'm thrilled to have Andy joining us today and excited that he's managed to find time to sit down and catch up with everything that's going on. Andy, welcome to WAYPOINTS, and thanks so much for joining us.
Wow, what an intro. That's so, I don't know if I'm worthy of all that, but thank you. I'm flattered.
Well, it's great to finally have you on the show. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on. I love what you guys do. I've been a world traveler for fishing, besides obviously the skiing stuff, for some time. And what you guys do, supplying that need to get people around the world catching awesome fish, is it's really great. It's awesome. You know, what a way to make a living.
Well, thanks. And I definitely want to talk to you about some of those journeys around the world. And, you know, most people in the world of fly fishing, Andy, they know you for your saltwater resume, your tarpon fishing, certainly your tournament success, and, of course, for the book that you wrote that has arguably become very much the Bible for tarpon fishing. It's a little tome called A Passion for Tarpon that hit the scene in 2010. And really, previous to that, there was never anything like it. An incredible book.
Well, thank you. You know, the book, it took about 5 years to compile that book, but the book was not about anything other than the fish. And I think that's what makes it so compelling. You know, I really wanted the book to be what is this fish and who innovated the sport, and the stories told about all the great successes and losses of catching these world records and tournament winning anglers. So it covers it's a nice little spectrum of my methodology that I use to win a bunch of tournaments. So you learn how to catch fish and the 5 elements of being a successful tarpon fisherman. But there's a great history chapter and a biology chapter, and then all these great interviews with these icons. So it's a book for the ages, I think, and it's a book for everybody. You can really pull something from that book that varies quite. It's got a big spectrum.
Well, that's A Passion for Tarpon. It's an incredible book. We're going to talk more about it. But before we talk specifically about the fishing and all of the obvious things that people expect to hear on a fishing podcast, I want to talk to you about how it all began for Andy Mill, kind of where you came from, how it started. You grew up in the West, if I'm correct on that, in Colorado, with a family that had a deep connection to the outdoors. How old were you when you first picked up a fly rod, Andy?
Well, you know, it's interesting. My family moved to Aspen in the early 60s, like 1961. And I was riding my bike to baseball practice in Wagner Field. And on the other side of the field, I saw this fly line, you know, it's being thrown horizontally across this space. And I thought, wow, look at that string. I was just so captivated. And so I rode my bike over there, and Ernie Schwiebert was in town giving clinics for the country store for Phil Wright. And so right then, that's where I touched my first fly rod, through the hands of Ernie Schwiebert, the great Hall of Famer. And then a number of years later, not that many years later, but Chuck Fothergill taught me how to tie flies with the Wright brothers. So I started making my allowance when I was like 10, 11 years old by tying flies for the local stores here in Aspen. And every day I'd just baseball practice during the day, and then the evening I'd be on the river, and I'd get home late and have leftovers. So as much as skiing were my roots here in Aspen, fly fishing and the trout streams here too were just as important.
Well, I mean, learning to cast from Schwiebert's kind of like learning to throw a football from Tom Brady. I mean, that's pretty cool.
Right. Yeah. And then get this, a number of years later, probably about 8 to 9 years later, I was just probably 18 or 19 years old. Ernie took me to Alaska with him. We went salmon fishing in Alaska, and then he would come into Aspen, and he liked the nightlife, and he would go out, and I was living in Basalt at the time, and here Ernie Schwiebert was sleeping on my couch, and we'd wake up and go up the frying pan. I had a Vega at the time, and I had a fly tying vise on the hood of my Vega, and Ernie Schwiebert was tying flies and waiting them out to me to catch fish on the frying pan.
That's a pretty good way to start right there. I mean, those are good early years.
Isn't that crazy?
That's amazing. And, you ask people, do you have a specific person that kind of introduced you to the sport? Not a lot of people can talk about royalty like that. I mean, what an incredible mentor.
Yeah, for sure.
That's
amazing.
And
then Chuck Fothergill was a master nymph fisherman. So I had a really nice little, base here in Aspen as far as fishing. And we've got great rivers. Still, we've got great rivers to this day. Really spectacular river.
Well, the early 60s, growing up in Aspen, quite the place to grow up and be a teenager at that time as well.
Yeah, I mean, when we first moved here, I think there were only like 1,200 people in Aspen, and the only paved street was Main Street. So it was really a little old cow mining town that would soon, find, the skiing, and they had the World Championships here in 1950, which kind of put Aspen on the map. But, it was just such a wonderful place to grow up because everybody knew everybody. It was like one big happy family. And the summers were filled, with fishing and baseball, and the falls were football. And then we started skiing, and then back to fishing in the summer. And I still have a home here or there in Aspen. And, I'll never not have, a residence here. It's just so magical.
Well, it is a special place. And, growing up there as a young kid, it allowed you to start a career that would make you famous at a relatively young age, joining the U.S. ski team really as a teenager. What first drew you to not just skiing? I mean, you grow up in Aspen, it's what you learn to do. You learn to ski, but what drew you to competitive ski racing, Andy?
Well, I think, once you start doing something well, and you really, really like it, it's really hard to find the barometer for how good you are unless you find competition. And with skiing, it was easy for me because I loved the thrill of speed and having the wind in my face and carving that ski and seeing how well I could make that turn and how fast I could get to the bottom. And then after a while, you get kind of bored just going fast. So, and then you find gates and you find competitions, and, you start going up through the ranks like anybody doing any sort of competitive sport. And I was pretty competitive by nature. We played baseball. We went to state in baseball and football. I was a quarterback. I pitched in baseball. So I was always an athlete, loving, to push it. And interestingly enough, now my skiing, I still like it, but I don't really love it that much anymore because it's kind of boring in the fact that I've been going up and down this mountain here in Aspen since 1960. And as a professional athlete, having the clock as your barometer, and if you remove that clock, now it's like, okay, yeah, I can do it, but how do you compete in skiing again? And other than that, I just don't, I can't imagine skiing 70, 80 days a year anymore. And it would be like similar to like a professional golfer retiring and going out and playing golf without the standard of par.
Yeah.
Making birdies, making eagles. No professional golfer is going to go play golf without holing out. You see what I'm saying? That's kind of like the way it is with me with skiing now.
Yeah, that's a good comparison for sure.
But there's so much to do here. I mean, on a daily basis last week, it was so much fun. I've got a couple of race Ducatis, and I was out breaking the law big time with a big old smile on my face. It's just amazing. You go down the road, there's nobody on the highway, and ripping down the back roads here in Aspen. You go home, you grab your fly rod, go to the river for 2 hours, come back, shoot your bow. It's like life is perfect out here right now. I feel guilty.
Well, a lot of people want to be Andy Mill right now. That's not bad. But, skiing wise, I mean, you had a hell of a career. You started young. You were a 2-time Olympian. You competed in Innsbruck, Austria in the Olympics in 76 and again in 1980 at the Lake Placid Winter Games. You competed in the World Championships, which is a huge deal for skiing. And in 76, you won the U.S. Alpine Championships. I mean, that is a great run for a ski racing career right there.
Well, the older you get, the better you used to be, right?
I think I've seen a bumper sticker that says that. Yeah.
But in the real world, in my perspective, I think I became a good fisherman because I did not win at the level I wanted to win at as a skier. Sure, I was the number one ranked American for like 7-8 years in downhill, and I got 6th in the Olympics in 76, but I didn't win. And I didn't realize the difference of mentality and success until I became a fisherman. And when I became a fisherman, and I've told this story before, Harry Spear was my mentor. I fished with him for 7 years before I started to tournament fish. And he groomed me to be a tournament fisherman. And when I became a fisherman, and I knew I was pretty good right away, and I knew about the Gold Cup and these big tournaments that, are so famous down in the Keys, I thought, I am not going to allow myself to lose, which is a different mindset than I had as a skier. As a skier, I didn't have a great mentor. I was not smart enough to get it on my own. I got hurt more often than I should have, and I didn't take it nearly as seriously as I did fishing. When you're younger, you're kind of, world traveling, you're partying a little bit, you got a big stage and you're a hot shot. But now with the mindset I had as a fisherman, I'd love to try to be that athlete, that skier again, because I would have taken it so much differently.
Well, I want to ask you, Andy, how that transitioned into tournament fishing for you and tarpon fishing for you. But I do want to talk just quickly about the different racing disciplines. And one thing, as much as I love fishing, ski racing is such an incredible sport. All 3 of my kids are just neck deep in ski racing. It's all they do almost year round. And so we're very much a ski racing family. I was never good myself, but I love watching my kids and obviously hearing the stories from the early days in the U.S. team are so great. But I think it's worth taking a minute to explain to our fly fishing listeners how it works. They may not be devout followers of alpine ski racing, but basically in racing, you have your tech events, which are slalom and GS, and that's the disciplines of, Michaela Schifrin and the Mayer brothers, Alberto Tombo, lots of beautiful techniques, and arguably, especially these days, kind of the lion's share of attention in ski racing. But then you have your speed events, and this is Super G and the legendary discipline of downhill racing. And while all 4 of these events are cool as hell, there's no doubt that downhill is kind of in a league of its own. It's what heavyweight boxing is to the sport of boxing, the heavyweight division, or what the masters are to golf. And this is Clommer and Bodie Miller and Herman Meyer, Svendal, all these legendary names in ski racing. They were downhillers, and to be a part of this fraternity is a pretty big deal. And that's what you did for years.
Well, look, I'm really proud of the fact I was a downhiller. You can wear that as a badge of honor, I think. Sure, if you skiing in the Olympics, that as your brother did, and your brother was successful, won a bronze medal. I mean, he's a hero of mine for sure, especially with what he had to go through to win. But, to be a downhiller, let's just take for an example, and I'll just run you through. If you go out of the starting gate at Kitzbühel, Austria, it's very low in elevation. And so you have a lot of rain and a lot of moisture in the snow. So you only maybe have 6 inches of cover. So the course itself is very rough, and it's solid ice. It's like if you take it's like trying to ski down the face of a wine bottle for 3,000 feet at 80 miles an hour. And at Kitzbühel, the first turn is a left-hand turn. You catch maybe about 170 feet off of a jump in the middle of the turn. You've got the hardest right-hand turn in the world, where you're going about 70 miles an hour around the outside of a basketball. It keeps falling away. That's solid ice. And if you miss the exit, you hit a wall, you hit a fence. The finish shush you come off this ledge and make a left-hand turn into a saucer cup, then the whole world drops away the side hill. I don't even know how steep it is. And then you hit this big monster jump and you catch sometimes 200 feet down into a hole, and you're going about 90 miles an hour into the finish.
And you come into the finish and there's 65,000 people cheering you on.
Yes. And you make it from the top of the mountain to the bottom in 1 minute and 50 seconds. And you covered maybe 3,000 feet.
Well, that type of speed and reckless abandon, Andy, I mean, let's just say it kind of takes a different mentality and what some might call a very unique personality to be a downhiller, which I think is a polite way of saying that to be a great downhill racer, you basically have to be partially insane and totally fearless.
You have to certain kids are born to play in the monkey bars, and others are born to play in the sand pit.
Well, the risk addicted few, as they say.
Right. And if you take a look at my, the injury count, I've had 13 knee operations. They got a replaced knee, 2 broken legs, 2 broken arms. I had my back operated on. I got my back fused 2 years ago, and I've got to have arthroscopic surgery on my shoulder next month. So a body is just a vehicle. Your mind is inside this capsule. And sometimes you don't run out of heart and spirit, you just run out of body.
And what was it that Hunter Thompson, who was a friend of yours, had a great line about that?
With the quote is, life's journey to the grave should not be one arriving with a pretty well-preserved body, but to rather skid in broadside in a cloud of smoke, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, proclaiming loudly, "Wow, what a ride."
That's still one of the great lines of all time. And
for sure.
And I think Hunter epitomized that in his life for sure.
Yeah, no kidding. But I hit a fence in Switzerland in 81, and I broke my neck, my back, and my leg, and all the ligaments in my right knee. So that was my last crash, and then I became a fisherman.
Well, during your years on the World Cup, Andy, the Euros gave you the nickname of Wild Dog. Tell us how this nickname came about, and was it deserved? It sounds like it certainly was.
Yeah, gosh, we all went through a crazy time in our lives, and luckily I survived mine, but I had real long hair and a beard. A lot of my buddies in Aspen called me Downhill Jesus, and in Europe they called me the Wilderhund, the wild dog, because we started this party at Kitzbühel at the Londoner bar after the downhill on that Saturday night, which became an international party after all these years. And originally it was just the British, the Canadians, the Americans, and the Austrians. And now you have famous people flying in all over the world for this party at the Londoner in Kitzbühel. And it seemed like I didn't care where we were or what was happening. We were always up for a good time, whether it be jump in the car and go spin around the block a couple times and bang off, some snowbanks. That was just the life of a skier back then.
Well, I was checking out your
money.
Photos on that. It was incredible. Yeah. There's that series called American Downhiller, and they show some pretty epic photos of you as a young racer. And
oh my God, I know how embarrassing. But anyway, so no, I'm really proud of having been an Olympian and racing for the country, and but when it's all said and done, I think I can't. You're comparing apples to oranges with fishing and skiing, but I'm probably more proud of my fishing success because of the domination that the guides and I had all those years.
Well, I want to talk to you about that. I mean, you leave ski racing, you retire in the early 80s, you begin this new chapter in the life of Andy Mill, and it all revolves really around tarpon fishing at that point. So how did you grew up fly fishing, you had some incredible mentors, but that saltwater bug, how did that start, and when did that first begin for you?
Well, when I left the ski team with an injury, I started a ski show called Ski with Andy Mill, and I syndicated that to 85 ski areas around the country. And then I started doing commentary for CBS. We did the coverage of the 92 and 94 Olympics, and I did about 20 years of broadcasting in the ski world, and I hated it. It was just so boring, but it's what I did. It's how I made my living, And then I did a couple of specials for the Outdoor Life Network as a host. And then they wanted me to host a fishing show. And right about that time, John Barrett invited me to go to Belize and catch tarpon on his show, Fly Fishing the World. And after I saw that tarpon bite my fly for the first time, like everybody that's ever become a tarpon fisherman will attest to the fact that you see that fish open its mouth and bite that bug, it's like it's over. You are toast, as Sandy Moret just said. And at that point, I was really ready for a career change. So I started hosting a fishing show for 7 years for the Outdoor Life Network. It was called Sportsman's Journal with Andy Mill. I traveled the world. We did 80 some shows from around the world, fishing shows. It was awesome. And right about that time, after fishing with Barrett, I went back to the Keys or back to Florida, because at the time Chrissy and I were raising kids down there, and I started fishing down in the Keys. And that's when I realized that how cool tarpon fishing was, how cool catching big tailing bonefish was on Shell Key. And I was just flipped out by the whole game. I could not get enough of it. It was insatiable to me. I would tie flies all winter, and I'd fish, every time I could get a chance to be on the salt. I bought a boat and fished mostly with guides, and I was riveted to the tournaments. So I was all in. So it was kind of like an evolution from an athlete to broadcasting, then to hosting fishing shows, and then fishing with Harry Spear down the Keys and learning how to catch all these really big fish.
Well, and then you got it hardcore into the tournament fishing, and you found just amazing success over your years of being all in on the tournaments.
Right. Well, yeah, and it was, and it's not that I like tarpon tournaments more than the bonefish tournaments. It's just that I think that there were just the Gold Cup. That's the biggest saltwater, fly fishing tournament there is. That's the Super Bowl. The fall fly, won the fall fly. I won a permit tournament with Dustin. I'm the only angler to win a bonefish permit. No, there's two of us, a bonefish permit tournament and tarpon tournament in the Keys, the invitationals. But we won the Gold Cup 5 out of 6 years.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, we, in the, the Golden Fly, I won that 6 times. So I've won 14 tournaments with 7 different guides, and I fished all with great guides. But people used to say, "Why do you tell everybody what fly you use, and why do you tell everybody how to do everything?" I said, "You know what? I don't care. They're not going to beat me anyway." I fished so much, and I caught so many fish that I had such a high level of confidence. I knew I was going to win. And that was so much fun. I cannot begin to tell you how much fun that was.
Well, and that level of confidence is huge. And certainly that, came from the background that you had prior to tournament fishing back in the ski world. But, there's an old article in Sports Illustrated back from the 80s that talks about what it takes to become a truly great downhill racer. And they have this whole list, but two of the things they talk about: strength and athletic ability is a key factor. And then another key factor is instantaneous reactions and quick reflexes. I mean, would you say that your years of competitive skiing and racing helped you become a better tournament angler and saltwater angler, and specifically a tarpon fisherman, or did it kind of only make you more competitive? Did any of that cross over to becoming a great angler?
I think there's two things here. One, I'd already been in big events. So a lot of the anglers that were fishing in the tournaments had never competed, in a big event. So I think nerves play a big role. When you start to tarpon fish and you see that fish bite your fly, a lot of times people will yank that fly out of that fish's face way too soon. And you just need to you have to know when to do what you're supposed to do. And having been a competitive skier all those years gave me, I think, an edge. But what it also gave me an understanding of the difference between winning and competing, which is a big difference. As a skier, I was always trying to do the best I could. As an angler, I was doing the best I could not to lose.
There you go.
And there's a big difference with that.
There's a huge difference, and it served you well for a lot of years. You dominated the tournament scene, especially in the Keys for years, amazing wins and a level and really a record, as we've talked about, of angling success that still is without equal today. You do this for years, and then one day you literally step away from the tournament scene, Andy. You're done. You kind of literally drop the mic and walk away. Tell us what that decision was about, and at what point did you realize, okay, I think I've checked that box and I've had enough?
I got burned out. I got really burned out in the fact that I was spending all this money. I was aggravated. Even if I was winning a tournament, a 5-day tournament, I'd be winning on Wednesday. I'd be a nutcase. I was having no fun. I didn't enjoy the sunrises. I didn't enjoy the fish, biting my fly and by chance falling off the hook. I would be just so aggravated. And the only time I had fun was when, I got the trophy at the end of those 5 days, and I'd start looking ahead to the next year. And I realized I was spending so much time and aggravation, and the tournaments became somewhat persnickety with rules and arguing with guides and fellow anglers. And, it became very, very, very serious, which was good. That's fine. But I just kind of got burned out. And then I thought to myself, I've already proven that I can win these, a number of times. Why am I so aggravated with this? It's not worth it. And that's when I really started to focus on teaching my son how to do this and getting him in the game. And at the age of 12, I think it was 11 or 12, he caught his first 100-pound tarpon on a fly rod. And then I became his mentor. And it was not a father teaching a son. I was his mentor. I was hard on him, and I could be hard on him because I knew that he wanted to go there. You can't be hard on a child that doesn't want to go somewhere. You have these helicopter parents in all these different sports that are demanding something to the kids that they don't want for themselves. And if that's the case, you're gonna ruin that child's relationship with the sport. But Nicky got it. He wanted to catch a fish. He wanted to fish early, and we were fishing 12, 13 hours a day. We'd put the boat in the water at 6 in the morning and fish till 6 and 7 o'clock at night. And then one year we put the boat in. We had a spot where there were some fish, that were kind of blooping around in this basin. So we'd put the boat in at 4 in the morning, and we'd hook and sometimes catch 6 to 10 fish before the sun even hit the horizon. And we'd fish till you couldn't see, out on the ocean that day. And then we'd go back into these basins and fish till 10 o'clock at night. So we would fish 17-hour days. And
you were fine. Now all of a sudden you're loving it again.
I was loving it. And my son was so into it, and he is so good. I cannot even begin to tell you how good he is.
Well, let me ask you specifically about your son, Nicky. And I want to preface this, Andy, with a conversation that I was recently having with our producer, Brian Gregson, about what we were calling kind of second generation super legit anglers who are following in the footsteps of their parents. I mean, you look at the Keys, you got the Huffs, the Moretts, you've got Bruce Chard and his son. I mean, there's a lot of father-son kind of these guide legacies that have been built. In freshwater, you've got, you look at like Henry's Fork legend, Mike Lawson, his son, Sean Lawson, who works with us here at Yellow Dog. I mean, we're now as an industry starting to see these multi-generational stories, second-generation hotshots that are very much following in the footsteps of their father and occasionally even their mother, which is pretty cool. Some of these next-gen anglers, they're just legit as hell. I mean, is Nicky, is he representing the Mill family name? Are you incredibly proud of what he's doing and where he's come?
Yeah, absolutely. He hasn't gotten into all the tournaments. Like, I used to fish 5 tournaments a year, the 3 tarpon tournaments and the 2 bonefish tournaments and the permit tournaments. So I'd fish 6 tournaments. And he only fishes the golden fly, but he's finished. He got second in the golden fly 2 years ago. He lost by 22 ounces. He caught 7 fish in the winter, caught 2, but the winter caught 140 pounder. He got third in the holly. But if you ask anybody, Dustin Huff, Rob Fordyce, you ask them who's the best tarpon fisherman out there right now, I bet you Nicky's in the first 2 names they mentioned.
Well, that's pretty cool.
He is that good. I think last year he finally got a little bit better than me. It was mostly because of his vision. Because, at 80 feet, I can throw a fly out there and he'll say you're 6 inches short. So he can see that fly out there at 80, 90 feet, a little Palolo worm fly with a 15-foot leader. and and 75, 80 feet of clear fly line. He sees that fish, he sees the mouth, he sees where that fly is, and that's the difference right now.
That's amazing. I definitely look forward to get Nikki on the show here for a future episode, and can't wait for that moment. I want to take a couple minutes and ask you a few questions specifically about technique. I mean, we've got the guy on the show right now who literally wrote the book on tarpon fishing. So let me ask you a couple technique specific questions. A
Sure.
couple years back in a Garden and Gun article, Andy, the author asked you about the key to being a great tarpon fly angler. Do you remember what your answer was on that?
I would say now, I don't know, because I would say casting dexterity.
Well, you talked about that for sure in this article, but you also had the simple one-liner of you have to show the fly to the fish without him seeing it. Explain that a bit more.
Well, here's the deal. The biggest mistake people make when they tarpon fish is they throw the fly to the fish. And we have to remember it's very similar to shooting birds with a shotgun. You've got to lead that bird. We have to lead these fish. And the first thing, there are 5 elements to being a successful fisherman. The first element is reading the situation. Okay, where's the wind? Where's the boat? How fast is the fish swimming? How deep in the water column is that fish? And then you got to be able to figure out where I'm going to put this fly to intercept this fish so the fish does not see how it lands. And it's all of a sudden just has to kind of be there. So you want to show the fly to the fish, but without him knowing how that fly got there. It's almost like a fly or a mosquito on the end of your nose and you slap it to get rid of it. You don't know how it got there, but all of a sudden it was there. And that is what really how to make a tarpon, the trigger bite off of a tarpon. If you can get a little fly, if you've got current and you get the fly well ahead of the fish and let the fly sink in the water column and let that current present the fly to the fish. Now all of a sudden you've got that fly right in front of that fish's face and you start tickling that fly. The fish you got a good chance of getting a bite out of that fish. And if you take a piece of yarn, and we've all done this with a cat or a piece of string, and you flip it over, you can get a reaction out of that cat if you get it in the right distance from the cat. If you hit it, obviously he's going to run away, or if it's too far away, he won't react. But that tarpon bite is the same as a cat reaching out, grabbing a piece of yarn. And I would say, as far as that goes, that is the key. But even more than that, it's like most people can only cast on one side of their body. They don't have dexterity. I don't care which direction the wind is blowing or how hard it's blowing, which direction the boat is pointed. You've got, as a great angler, you've got to have that casting dexterity to be able to get the fly exactly where it needs to go right now. Well, and that is the biggest liability most people have. They have no idea how to throw down the opposite side of their body.
Well, one question I have for you too. I mean, you talked to a lot of the Keys guides down there that have either watched your tournament success over those big years or participated in it, fished with you. They all talk about how you've developed some game-changing innovations when it comes to tarpon fishing and feeding tarpon. What do you think are some of your most significant innovations when it comes to tarpon?
Well, I really think that Timmy Hoover and I started fishing with 1/0 hooks before anybody. And I remember I tied these tarpon toad little green flies, to go fish early in the season to get ready for the tournaments. And I showed up with all these flies tied on little 1/0s. And Hoover asked me, he said he would start chuckling and laughing at me with these flies. And I said, Timmy, most of these fish have been so beat up by so many anglers and so many people throwing flies at them. Let's just try this. And that's the whole scenario I was just talking about, how to really lead the fish, let the current take the fish to the fly, or have the fish swim into the fly. And with these little flies too, I think a lot of in the early years of tarpon angling, everybody talks about how the fish falls off the hook. They can't catch them. They jump 6, but they didn't catch any. There's 2 problems here. One is that in the early years, they were using too big of hooks. So the wire on a 3/0 and a 4/0 hook was too thick. That hook could not penetrate that bone very well. So when we started using 1/0 hooks, you can imagine the wire and how thin it is. It's like a hypothermic needle. So when you set that hook, that little 1-0 is going to go right to the bend. And secondly, you have to understand that when you get tight to a tarpon, you basically allow that fish to set the hook. We don't do much in setting the hook. We may just kind of hold that fish, but when that big fish is shaking that 40-pound head, if I can just hang on to my fly line and strike back and just put the butt of the rod up against my waist and just hold that fish, every time he slashes that head, he's setting that hook. Most people want to go to the rod to set the hook, just like a trout strike. They say, don't trout strike, right? Because all you're doing is bending the tip of the rod. It takes nothing to bend a rod, nothing. But if you keep that rod fairly straight and you hang on to that fly line and that you got a 100-pound fish shaking his head, that hook is going to get set. The other thing is, like, a lot of people lose smaller tarpon. They all jump off. You have to remember, a smaller fish, the head on that fish is not very heavy. And a fish in the water, if it's not swimming, is probably weighs less than 10% of its total weight. That's why children can hold their parents up in a swimming pool, because of the buoyancy of water. And it's even more so in salt water. So a small tarpon falls off the hook, most likely because when you go to set the hook, the head of that tarpon moves with the setting of the hook. There's no resistance. That's why it's really important to use small hooks when you're fishing for small tarpon.
No, that makes total sense. Absolutely. And the Keys guides, a lot of them described your secret to a lot of tournament success is being able to catch the fish that didn't want to be caught. And I think that's every tarpon angler's conundrum right there, right? But talk to us a little bit about, your philosophies on reacting to the body language of the fish.
Well, here's two things. A good guide can find fish. A great guide can find the fish that doesn't want to be found. And like you just mentioned, a great angler can catch that fish that doesn't want to be caught. The only way to get really good at this is understanding the game that you're chasing. And like a lot of times now, there's a whole new technique that's come out, fishing with Pallola worms and clear fly lines, double hand stripping the fly. That's a whole new technique. But as far as the fish is concerned, it's basically like a dance. Once I know the fish sees the fly, he's gonna show me something, and that's when I make my next move. Most people throw the fly, and then they start stripping. They just start stripping, and a lot of times they'll strip that fly out of the zone. But remember, it's a game, it's a dance, it's a waltz. So once I get the fly in there, I might, when I think the fish is close enough to see my fly, I might just start to slide that fly very softly. But a lot of fish don't like aggressive bumping of bugs. But once I slide that fly, that fish, I can see when he looks, he'll look at it and he'll do one of two things. He'll move towards the fish or he'll duck it. He'll duck his head and swim away from the fly. But once he starts to come a little bit closer, I try to feed the fish a little bit further away from me, because if you happen to strip too much and you pull the fish too close to the boat, eventually he's going to feel the boat. And the other thing is it's very important to wait for the shot to develop. And a lot of times people have to make one or two casts to a fish because they never get the fly in the right spot the first time. And that's one of the things that Harry Spear used to always say: wait for your shot. The only reason you make a real long shot is you have a going away, or you might lose your shot, so you take a long shot. But otherwise, if you can wait for the fish to get to be 60 or 70 feet away from the boat, when you set that hook, you're going to have a good chance of setting the hook, because there's not going to be that much stretch in the fly line. If you make that 90-foot cast and get the bite out there, you've got 10% of stretch in your fly line before you get tight to the hook.
Yeah, that's stuff people don't think about. I mean, that makes so much sense when you explain that.
Right. And when you're out there, you're so damn excited. You see this fish, it's like, oh man, I gotta go. And you get all hyper, and the angle might not be right yet. The fish is not right yet. You just have to wait for everything to marinate.
Wait for your shot.
Just wait for your shot. It's like watching a fish dry fly feeding. It might be midging, and there's a tempo to his feeding. And if you wait and watch this fish and see the rhythm of his feeding routine, then you can time your cast. And it's the same type of thing as watching a bonefish, tail on a flat blowing mud. You got to wait for your shot.
That's right. Well, let me ask you a little bit about trip preparation and general practice, Andy. I mean, do you still practice when it comes to fishing? I mean, for instance, with casting, that's the obvious one, but is there such a thing as a destination specific or a species specific training regimen that you always have focused on?
What I've done as far as training wise is I target black-tip spinner sharks down in the Keys when they come down to migrate. And when I started working with Hardy and developing these saltwater rods and reels, I thought, what a great animal to cast or to catch, to do one of two things: test the product, but also learn how to fight big fish. A black-tip spinner shark is around 90 pounds of muscles, just solid steel. And when you hook one, they jump up your leader and spin up your leader and take off, and they're awesome. And big Jack Crevalles, 30-pound jacks, you can really learn how to fight fish, fishing for these animals. Like if you wait all year to go tarpon fishing, you're going to be so excited and you don't really know how to pull on a big fish yet. But if you go shark fishing, or go find, and I think that's the best fish for me that I like. You can catch lemon sharks. They're kind of lame, not as bad as a nurse, but they're lame. But if you have a chance to go shark fishing or some other type of fishing where you can catch a bunch of fish, you can really hone in how to clear your fly line, like with bonita. You get into a bonita blitz, you can learn how to clear your fly line and fight these fish. That way, when you do go tarpon fishing, most people are not going to catch that 100-pound fish because they've never caught one, and they're so nervous and they're so excited they don't pull hard enough. And the longer you have that fish on, the odds are that he's going to get off.
Yeah, that makes sense.
As far as practicing, I didn't need to practice on sharks. I was catching sharks just to test, all the product that we were designing. But that's a hell of a way to practice, to learn how to pull on big fish.
Yeah, so when it mattered, you're in the game.
Yeah, you're going to hook on a good day. You're going to see thousands of sharks in there when they're spawning like that out there on the flats, and they're only in 5 to 10 feet of water. You chum them up, and you can catch 10 to 15 a day if you have the gumption to do that, because they're going to bite your bug, and it's awesome because you chum them in. They come in at 30 miles an hour. I had probably an 800 to 1,000 pound hammerhead eat a 90-pound black tip spinner shark off my fly.
And then what happened?
well, for some reason, it was interesting because all of a sudden, I was in my 18-foot egret at the time. I see this big shadow come under my boat, and he grabs this spinner shark. I'm about ready to get the shark and take the fly out. He grabs this shark sideways and swims off with it. So I've got my trolling motor, and I just start following the shark. I just let him do what he's doing. And all of a sudden, my spinner shark is gone. And now I've got this hammerhead attached. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm going to catch this hammerhead. And I sat down on my casting platform, and I just let this hammerhead tow my boat. And I was pulling as hard as I could for like 45 minutes. And then my fly line broke. Because, see, with the spinner sharks, I was using like straight 60-pound monofilament, because the roughness of the shark will your 20-pound IGFA legal stuff, they'll just chafe through that right away in the first jump. So I've got terminal tackle, and the lightest piece of material was the core of my fly line. So I ended up breaking the fly line on this hammerhead, but the things you see out there, it's just amazing.
That's incredible. Let me ask you this. You obviously have fished a ton in the Keys over the years. When you had your show, you were going all over the world back in the day filming for the show. What about recently in other destinations? Have you been doing much traveling out of the country lately to fish? And do you have any favorite places?
Yeah, I just started again this January. Skip Smith, He's a legendary offshore captain, and we interviewed him for our podcast just recently. So we went down marlin fishing with Skip in Panama. We were in Costa Rica, and then I really want to start bone fishing again. So I took a group of guys over to the Bahamas with me in January on the 11 boat, which was really cool. And I want to start bone fishing more. And then, and then I just got back from Belize. I went permit fishing in Belize. So I haven't traveled in a long time just because I so much love the Keys and Tarpon down there. But the bone fishing really fell off there for a number of years, and I love bonefish, so I want to start traveling again a little bit. There's so many great fisheries out there and fishing destinations, and it's kind of hard with the international travel right now. But I'm at the age now that I want the next 15 years, I want to do some great stuff again. I've done all the competitions, and I've been in the Keys forever. I'm closing in on 70. And I've only got so many, years where I'm going to be able to do things real hard still. And I'm going to take advantage of that.
There we go. Well, you brought up travel and international travel. I want to ask you about an issue that is super relevant right now as the country and the world continues to deal with shutdowns, quarantines, and the economic fallout from this whole coronavirus situation. You recently put together and released a short video, basically a public service announcement. They talked about how people and how anglers can help guides and outfitters and lodges during a time when the world of fishing has basically been shut down to everyone. Talk to us a little bit about that message and what compelled you to put that out and what kind of feedback you're hearing from that.
Well, I just know that my life has been filled with other people, and these fishing guides for the last 35 years have provided me with such an opportunity to learn about these awesome fish around the world. And it's a big part of my being and my, who I am and what I stand for, that I've always, with great guides, they can rebook a trip that if you have to cancel it, especially if you cancel 6 weeks out from a travel plan trip. Most good guides can rebook that. But now, since, nobody can travel, they can't rebook. So if you take a look at these fishing guys, they all have families and, their life is gone. And for the most of them, they don't have a stockpile that they can live off of for the next 8 months, if you will. So my public service announcement was, hey, if you like your guide, pay him anyway if you can't get there. If you can't go fishing this year, send them the check anyway. Because most of the anglers that fish in saltwater have got, they're fairly affluent. They've got to have some money because the day rate is like $700-800 a day. And if you can afford it, send them the check. That way, these guys, because we're into the spring and now summer, this is where they make their hay for the whole winter. And if all of a sudden their job, they can't rebook and they can't fish, they've got no income, zero. But each one of us, if we can just help that week that we can't fish, if we pay them, then they're going to be fine. They're going to be sustainable. And that was just the message I had. And yeah, sure, we've all gotten hit pretty hard. And if you can't, afford the full week's worth of fishing or the full fare, send a check for 50%, just something. And let's not forget, karma is a good thing to have in your back pocket. And these guys, if they know that you sent that money, they may put you into a prime spot next year, next tarpon season. If you've been fishing in February and March, who knows, maybe April or May is going to be on the schedule if you do this. And that was the only message I had. It's like, let's take a closer look at the people that really add a big value to our lives and our lifestyle. Let's just do what we can.
That's so important right now. The industry of destination angling, all the lodges, guys, we've talked about it on earlier episodes of Waypoints, but everybody's getting brutalized right now. And, when this is said and done, and we know that it will pass, but when it's over, we need that infrastructure to be intact. We need guides to be able to, still be in the game, to be able to take us. We need lodges to be open. We need that structure that is destination angling all over the world to still be intact. And it's such an important thing to keep in mind right now.
You know what? As a commercial real estate guy, I've got a couple partners and we own some strip malls in Arizona, Boulder, and Denver. And what we've done, we told all of our small business owners, don't pay rent for 3 months. Your rent's free. We have the chance to absorb that income right now because, as you just mentioned, in 3 months, we want them in those stores. We want that infrastructure in place so that they can get back to work, because if those units are empty and we got to find somebody else to create a new business, then we're all messed up.
That's right. Well, it's big picture thinking is what it is. And we will get through this, and we collectively have a big say of what's going to be there when we emerge on the other side. And it's so important to keep that in mind.
You're going to get hit now, but you're not going to get hit as hard now as you will later if you're greedy.
That's right. It's a great philosophy, and hopefully a message that continues to resonate with people, not only in the world of destination angling, but beyond.
Right.
So you and your son, Nikki, you've recently launched kind of a new media project. You guys have got a killer podcast that's done some amazing episodes about the history of the Keys and some of the pioneers of fishing. Tell us more about this project and where people can go to learn more about the work that you guys are putting together.
Well, what it is it's really my son's brainchild. He's been asking for about 5 years to do a podcast. And so what we've done is it's called Millhouse Podcast. And we're just focusing on elderly guys, that are in the Hall of Fame, these great icons from the Keys. We want to hear their stories, because these stories are going to go away at some point. We don't have any sponsor. We're self-funding this. We've done 14 interviews so far. But we've got Flip Pallet, Chico Fernandez, talking about growing up in Cuba, how he used to build his own bike and fly kites in Cuba. And when Castro came, how the whole family had to leave their fortune and go to go into Key West. And then they drove to Miami, and he hooked up with Flip Pallet, Norman Duncan. And when they used to take air mattresses out in the Miami River, and just talking about, Steve Huff and all these world record fish that they gaffed, and the Terminus won, and Sandy Moret. In his later years, he got together with Now or Never Glades Foundation and trying to fight the water pollution in South Florida. But the stories are all so riveting, because it's basically who we are as a fishing family in the Keys. And like my book, A Passion for Tarpon, I think a big part of the attraction there were the stories of winning and losing these battles against these fish. And that's what the whole podcast is about. Well, next week, it's interesting. Like next week, I'll give you a prime example. Skip Smith next week, he ran the legendary boat, the Hooker. And then his owner, Jerry Dunaway, bought a freighter, and they put this boat on the back of the freighter, and they took it around the world for 15 years, setting new world record, Marlin new world records on light tackle. And he talks about how the prisoners escaped in Panama, and they shot the prisoners and fed the prisoners to the sharks. They talked about they filled the boat up with like 45,000 gallons of fuel in Hawaii and set off for Australia. And they got there 3 weeks later, going 8 knots, for 3 weeks. Riveting things. And we've gotten good traction. As you know, with the podcast, it's storytelling. And I appreciate you mentioning that.
Well, it's a great podcast, and everybody listening to Waypoints right now needs to check out the Millhouse podcast, because the history that you guys cover and the stories are awesome, and it's such an important part of the sport. And thank you guys for putting that together. It's a great platform, and I definitely encourage all of our listeners to check it out. And I'm looking forward to what you guys have in store for the future.
Yeah, it's we're just going to keep going down the road trying to find these great untold stories.
Well, and there's a lot of good ones. This industry is full of them. There's no doubt about it. Well, I've got a last question for you, Andy, and I honestly could not let this one go. And this made me laugh when I read about it. But AARP magazine, okay, they released their list of, quote, the top 20 hottest men over the age of 50. I did not know that this was a thing, but apparently it's a big deal, okay? And on that list, the name Andy Mill. So how's that working out for you these days?
Well, the only other thing that was kind of funny, but the only thing that's good about my age is Medicare. That's the only good thing.
Well,
but it's like you said, I've had a big spectrum, and it's been a hoot the whole way. But to tell you the truth, the greatest thing that I've experienced in my life is this relationship with my son Nicky.
Well, that's awesome. Well, Andy, thank you for all that you've done for the sport and that you continue to do. You've got an amazing life that you've put together, and you've done so much for fly fishing. We appreciate it. And thank you for taking time to sit down with us today and join us on this episode.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. And you guys be well, stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you on the water sometime soon.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We will do it. And that's it for this episode of Waypoints, the podcast that is 100% dedicated to travel, adventure, and exploration. Be sure to visit yellowdogflyfishing.com to plan and research your next fishing trip. Sign up for newsletters and new podcasts, and stay up to date on the latest travel news and developments, because things are changing right now like you cannot believe. Join us for our next episode of Waypoints, and remember, life is short and no one ever regretted a life of adventure.
This has been another episode of Waypoints, the podcast of fly fishing travel and adventure angling. Thank you for joining us, and be sure to visit yellowdogflyfishing.com for more trip updates, travel news, expert advice, and adventure profiles.